Welcome to WonderCon 2021. This is the panel for the science of WandaVision, which is brought to you by fascinating gadgets, gizmos, and gear-based technologies. That is our podcast that takes your favorite fictional science and technology and we make it a reality. We are the Brain Trust, and first of all, this name you're going to recognize. It is Dr. Michael Dennin. You may know him as the friendly skeptic on Ancient Aliens. He's also the author of Divine Science, Finding Reason at the Heart of Faith, and he is our physics phenom. Dr. Michael Dennin, it's so great to have you next to me here.
You know, Dan, it is absolutely amazing to be here, and I realize something. We are just like Wanda. We take fiction and make it reality.
You're exactly right. We do. And we're going to tell you how every person can have their own little piece of magic to do that, to create their own reality, Dennin. We're going to do that, but we're not going to do it alone. We need our enigmatic engineer, Ben Siepser. And Ben, you may not recognize that name as quickly as Dr. Michael Dennin, but that is because he operates behind the scenes. He is a former rocket scientist. So that means he's worked on rockets, but that's not it. He's worked on satellite and spacecraft, things that have circled the Earth and been in outer space, hundreds of missions up there. His stuff is all over the galaxy, potentially the universe. He is a neuro device engineer working at the interface between brains and computers. And if that doesn't sound like vision, I don't know what does. Ben, how close are you to making a sentient robot?
You know, I think as soon as we get that Mind Stone, we'll have it all worked out.
I hope so, because that would be a great fourth person, I think, here. Although I might be wiped out because I am a digital producer, podcaster, but I'm a world-class thinker who would probably be out-thunk by a computer with AI capabilities. But until that time, I am still the analytical mastermind here. And you know, guys, I got a surprise for you. This is something you guys don't even know. But most of the time for our podcast, I'm kind of the pretty face here. You guys are the experts here. Dennin, obviously, you've got a couple of advanced degrees in physics. Ben, you're a former rocket scientist, current neuroengineer. But both of you, you guys get to flex your mental muscle all the time. I got a surprise for you guys. Not this week, because we are going to talk about television, and much like He-Man was the master of the universe, I am the masters of television. I have an advanced degree in television here, guys, and there is a lot of television to discuss. So being an expert this week, is there anything that you want to ask me?
Well, Dan, I actually do have a question for you. I was shocked at how little of the TV references I got right or remembered. Some of the obvious ones I really was good with, Dick Van Dyke, Brady Bunch. Shockingly, I was really bad at the shows when I was alive in recognizing those. Sure. I watched a lot of Mary Tyler Moore, and I missed that, some of the stuff was Mary Tyler Moore and taken from there. So I'm real curious, Dan, with your masters in television, how did you find those TV references? Were you all over it? Was this like right up your alley, or was it more the feel of the TV?
I got to tell you honestly, and I'm not tooting my own horn here, I recognized all the references because I love the old stuff. I love the old television. Most people would think that the first era, the 50s era, it's not really these, and also these aren't broken down by decades. They're broken down by aesthetic styles, by style. And the first one, most people would say I Love Lucy, especially when you have, the young couple and then the older couple that's their best friend. But really, there's a lot of Dick Van Dykes in there. It's especially the beginning with that intro where instead of tripping over the ottoman, he goes he phases right through it. I loved it. I mean, I thought that was really great. So I kind of got a lot of them, and we can talk them because I'm curious. Two questions for you. Ben, I'm going to ask you this question. Do you know why this show is called WandaVision?
Well, I assume it's because we're getting a vision of Wanda and Vision.
It's not bad. That's pretty good. What do you think, Dennin?
Well, I was going with television is what we were watching, and Telly made television, but Wanda made WandaVision. But I don't know who Telly is. I'm just hoping there's a historical person there.
Well, I'm guessing that it's probably because the show consists of Wanda and Vision. WandaVision, I'm guessing. And also,
that was more obvious, Dan. I like that.
that was number one. But also because it is like television. It is WandaVision. It's her, the way she sees the world, which is really fun. So which era of television did you guys find that was your favorite for whatever reason? Dennin, I'm going to ask you first because you were kind of confused on it a little bit. But did you gravitate towards any of these that you liked?
I feel like for some weird reason, the kind of the Brady Bunch one, um, I just really have very, very fond memories of the Brady Bunch that I didn't realize I had. I watched it a lot as a young kid, and I'm like, that seems to be going for the Brady Bunch. I felt the inside of the room was not exactly like their house. So I was thinking, was there some Partridge Family thrown in? But I didn't watch a lot of Partridge Family, so I couldn't remember it, but I knew it as a show. I watched some of it. But it made me also try and think about like, was I only watching reruns of the Brady Bunch, or was it still being made when I was watching? Like, it brought back all these questions and concerns. But that was the one in this sequence, for some reason, I gravitated to most strongly.
Wow, you had like a real moment with this. I mean, this really did something to you.
I really did. It really got to me. I'm wondering, Ben, if any of this really got to you in that way, or I don't even know. Are you a TV person like that?
Well, I certainly grew up watching a lot of television. I think I enjoyed the Modern Family, or maybe Office. It took me a second to decide which one it was trying to be. I think I came down on Modern Family because that is a family sitcom versus The Office, which is not. But they both are single camera with talking head interviews interspersed. But for me, I think really it was the Malcolm in the Middle episode, just because that really brought home my teenage and such, or maybe preteen nostalgia of watching Frankie Muniz and friends, joke around and have a goofy domestic life.
I think it's great. I mean, I think everyone can kind of have, because it stretches through such a wide spectrum of the television universe, people can really have, their favorites. Everyone's going to have something that emotionally appealed to them. I had one that was totally different. There's the one where the kids are born, and it feels like the 90s. And I thought for sure it was Full House. But when you watch the intro is a subtle combination of Family Ties and Growing Pains, both shows that I loved watching growing up. And so to me, that was my favorite one. The Brady Bunch one was extraordinarily weird for reasons we'll get later for me. But I really liked that one. It felt very homey. And, much like Ben was watching these during his formidable years, maybe that's why it appealed to me. But one of the things that I think we can all agree on is television is such an important theme to this, because television is really an escape. That's its purpose. And that is exactly what Wanda is doing here. She's trying to get away from this sorrow and this grief, and she creates this, individual world that she can kind of rule, and it's all to herself. Before we move on here, guys, I'm going to leave this as a nugget for you, and appropriately so, because we're not going to talk about it here. But I think the commercials that show up in the episodes are really a key to what's going on, not only in this show, but also what may come in the future. Maybe we'll do a little episode on that for our own podcast and kind of talk about that, because I thought that was really curious. So we're going to talk about her creating a reality here, and I'm going to quote Ray Stantz here, because I think there's a lot of weird biblical overtones here. And Ray Stantz from Ghostbusters, he said, this is Old Testament, real wrath of God type stuff. And I think we're going to get into that. So first of all, I think we must, because there's so much magic inside of this television series. We've got to explain it, guys, because there is no such thing as magic. Magic is just science that we have not yet explained. But there's a lot going on here. Dennin, I know that you love Harry Potter, and I know magic is a soft spot for you. Where are you with this?
So I think at the high level, we just need to recognize at the beginning, as you said, magic is simply a sufficiently advanced technology that we can't explain it yet. And so that's the core here. The other thing is, any good magic in whether it's in TV or books or whatever, really is just about manipulating energy in interesting ways. And that's what technology does for us. If you think about the core of all of our technology at the moment, has really been about manipulating electricity and magnetism. Mm-hmm. And magic has a lot of parallels, because that's what we're used to manipulating. So your most basic magic, which I will say is Agatha's magic, I know I'm jumping to the end, is energy manipulation. We learn that Wanda has a very different type of magic. And I think that's going to be something we're going to want to explore. But at its core, most basic level, when you are using science to explain magic, you're really getting at that technology that is so advanced you don't understand it yet.
Yeah, I think, Dennin, you really nailed it there, that, to us, we manipulate electricity and magnetism basically at will at this point. And a lot of the powers that we see could really just be explained by an advanced being that can manipulate gravity at will. Being able to, move telekinetically or send rays and forces with, glowing, fiddly glowing things in the air, that can all pretty much be explained by gravity manipulation, which we know is possible. We just don't know how to do it yet.
I think that that's really interesting. And I think that there are a lot of fun things that in some ways, they really take things that could be scientifically explained, and in the show, they call it magic, but I still think there's some science behind it. And so the first one I want to talk about, which I think is kind of fun, is the idea of what they call a probability hex. And this is where the bomb lands in their home in Scovia, is that right? Scovia. I think I made it to the Sokovia. All right. Third time's a charm with a little help from Ben. Sokovia. And what's interesting about that is Wanda's able to unconsciously really kind of make this bomb not go off. But the probability thing is interesting because I believe that probably has something to do with a quantum outcome, her being able to really kind of in some ways weaponize Schrodinger's cat. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, Dennin, but that's the way I felt about it.
Dan, I think a lot of people would go that way in this case, just the way you went. It's the natural way to go. I'm going to build on something we learned later on, that she uses chaos magic, and it's called a probability hex. There is another place in physics where probability and chaos plays a big role, and that's in thermodynamics and entropy. And as a young witch, new to her power, new to chaos magic, it's actually much easier to imagine her impacting entropy, which is really what causes things to break. And fundamentally, she just needs this bomb to not work. And the deterioration of matter is what entropy is all about. It's going to, a more chaotic state, breaking down. The increase of entropy is the natural flow and state of things. And most of what we build is to go against entropy. We're building mechanisms that are more ordered and more organized. And so for the bomb to work, everything has to go in exactly the ordered, organized fashion it was built to. So all she has to do is make it disorganized. And entropy is a measure of the amount of disorganization. So she creates a bubble of disorganization, and suddenly the bomb doesn't work. Again, could be quantum, but I think in this case, being a young witch, she's more likely to control entropy, given what we learn about her later.
Yeah, and another thing to think about there is our advanced engineering things contain lots and lots of parts, and you don't have to make one part fail completely. If you just make it so that instead of each part having a 1 out of, say, 10,000 failure rate, you make them all have a 1 out of 1,000 failure rate. All of a sudden, if you have 1,000 parts, you have a guaranteed failure.
Whoa. Well, from a statistical standpoint.
Statistically speaking.
Right, yeah. Because we can't guarantee anything, as we've just decided.
No, of course not.
But, I think that's great. And in some ways, it also tells you the more complex it is, the easier it is for this type of approach to work on it then. I mean, the more parts, the more chances of failure.
Definitely. And that's why her first success with magic is in a highly complicated bomb. Because I suspect all of the timing devices in there were actually quite advanced. After all, Stark built it, and he builds complicated things. So I'm assuming it was sufficiently complicated for a young witch, fresh in her powers, not knowing what she was doing, to mess it up.
And the other thing, speaking of messing it up, the other thing that kind of that shows up here that might be difficult to explain, but not for us, for the average person, of course, is the idea of these ruins that kind of stop magic from happening. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if all of this, what they call magic in the show, is really manipulation of energy, then the runes must be some kind of dampening, some kind of Faraday cage-ish type thing where all the energy is kind of dissipated and then doesn't accurately work. Ben, what do you think about that?
That's really interesting because we see these runes work on both a local and a very, not global scale, but a large scale, because we see the runes stop Wanda's powers from working in Agatha's basement, but we also see Wanda's runes stop Agatha's powers from working in the entire hex. So there's some really interesting properties there, and it could be something related to, I think, again, this chaos kind of stuff and this entropy kind of stuff, where these symbols have an effect on other people's magic, where now you're trying to maybe do your incantation, and all of a sudden you're messing up a syllable, you're messing up a hand wave, and all of a sudden your spells just don't work.
I also think, Ben, when you talk about that, you mentioned the syllables and the hand waves. So there's clearly a frequency element to each witch or warlock and their magic, right? They're manipulating energy. But we know energy is transmitted as waves. That's how you move energy from one place to another. And everybody presumably is going to have their own unique signature in that. And that's why I think these runes are a very brilliant static defense. Because Dan, you said it right. If they set up a Faraday type cage, but one that's frequency dependent. So I think of it more as a microwave cavity, right? In a microwave cavity or in a laser cavity or any of these various things that enhance a certain frequency, you get a laser or you get microwaves because you build a cavity of the right size to enhance the right wavelength. Well, likewise, you could dampen the right wavelength. So you draw the rune with your particular signature in a way that you're setting up a cavity. And that's why Wanda doesn't need any special real magical training to do this. She just needs to see how they're drawn and understand what to do. And by drawing it with her power, she sets up a cavity that enhances hers and dampens anyone's else. Because if you're a little off frequency, it's just not going to work. And so that's what's cool about it. It's like this really nice static defense. You don't need to actually have learned any spells to make it work, which is what Wanda proves.
And I imagine that you could have each rune would affect a different frequency, so you could have several runes that would protect you from several different frequencies of this manipulation.
What makes it even easier, Dan, is if you think of the way certain things behave, if you build the right cavity, it only enhances one frequency and dampens everything else automatically, except occasionally rare harmonics of it. So you really actually can draw something that just enhances your frequency. And as long as we assume witches and warlocks work within a similar band but different frequencies, and you're not hitting harmonics, you get everybody else with one rune.
I mean, what's interesting about that is it brings us to Wanda herself, right? Like, she has to use all of this magical power, all this manipulation of energy, and some of it, unbeknownst to her, she has these powers. I want to talk about her a little bit specifically because she has some very interesting things here. I mentioned at the beginning, we've got this biblical overtone in some ways in the things that she's doing. There's some very interesting narrative parallels, and I think Wanda herself, in some ways, she acts like a god in here. There are laws of physics in this world. But even with her adjusted physics, there are things that she's allowed to change that are different from our conventional physics, like the kids growing up really quickly. And she also has the ability to adjust people's minds and how, what I would imagine, Ben, I'm going to ask you about this. I would imagine she's able to really alter our brains are just electrochemical organs. And so her ability to make them forget, or at least hide what they're, or at least manipulate what they're saying, must be some way of altering these electrochemical reactions in the brain, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So along the lines of this magic rune spell that we were talking about just before, you can imagine that if magic is this standing wave of electromagnetic energy and maybe some gravity waves as well that are existing in this within this anomaly, you can imagine that those could then be infiltrating people's brains because our skulls are totally not able to block electromagnetic waves in any significant way.
Well, those are not steel plates. If you have a steel plate in your head, you might be all right. But for most of us,
or a tinfoil hat.
That would be it would be really interesting to see if somebody wore a tinfoil hat inside the anomaly, if they wouldn't be affected by the powers. That would be a fun experiment. So these huge standing waves of magic that are going throughout the anomaly, we can easily see that would affect everybody's brains. And then perhaps when Vision or Agnes bring somebody in and out of the spell by physically touching their brain, they're maybe adding that dampening field directly to the mind to block the waves.
I really like what you said there, Ben, about the standing waves and the electromagnetic piece. But Dan, you said something that I think was absolutely brilliant, and you may not even have known it, and something that has changed my total thought on the mind control in this right here as we're watching the show and recording it. So you mentioned that the brain is electrochemical. It has chemistry in it. Like Ben's described, I always think of sort of mind control from the electricity magnetism part, because we're used to that being a wave that can propagate out. But Wanda is fundamentally entropy magic. She's been described as doing chaos magic, which I'm taking the technical physics term here of entropy magic. And entropy is the fundamental sort of governing principle behind chemical reactions. The second law of thermodynamics, drives what happens for chemical reactions. So Wanda's control over entropy could be the way she actually controls brains by directly impacting chemical reactions. Sort of like Ben said, we believe you can manipulate gravity. We just haven't figured out how. Entropy is a state, just like energy is a state. It's interesting to think about, can you manipulate it? But if you could ever figure out how to change the way entropy behaved, I would imagine you would change chemistry in ways that you could control people, perhaps. So it's a crazy new way, and then your tinfoil hat's not going to work.
Well, that would make sense. I mean, first of all, let me just tell you one thing, Dennin. It does not surprise me that I said something accidentally brilliant. As I said at the top of the thing, I am a top-level thinker. Only AI can beat me when it comes to deep thinking. Although I will tell you that I love hearing me changing your mind, and I think that is a perfect explanation. But it also, what I want to bring it kind of to Vision. He's the other part of this. We already discussed earlier that the show is called WandaVision. We got to talk about Vision really quickly. And I think that kind of leads us into it, because Vision is a fully formed, fully created being. She's fully created by Wanda, and ergo, because she controls all of the physics in this world and would control his composition, I would imagine that, especially when it comes to his powers and his ability to do things, I'm going to go again with this religious theme. She really made him in her image. And he has some similar powers to her. But I'm curious what you think about a fully formed being having some of these powers. Dennin, I'm going to go right back to you.
It's really interesting when you think about it, because, as you say, Vision was created by her, kind of in her image. And it's interesting to explore, were his powers his own or were they hers? What's the overlap? When we watch them outside the bubble, the original Vision before he dies, there are some very strong similarities between what they do. Maybe that's what draws them together as a couple. And it's really interesting to see in the initial parts, kind of what he does that really draws and looks like her power, but done in his own way. He's manipulating his appearance. He is, manipulating some things around him as he phases in and out of stuff, which he really shouldn't do in front of people. That would be bad. So, it's an intriguing thing, but I wonder, this is kind of strikes me as a mental question, which is why I'm really going to have to throw this to our neuroengineer, because is that mental aspect that I'm not sure I completely understand yet.
Yeah. So, well, we know that he's made in her image directly, because she says that the piece of the Mind Stone that resides in her is what she kind of used to give this TV version of Vision his power. And we know that even the real Vision was the Mind Stone in his forehead, which is also the same stone that Wanda got her powers from when she was working for Hydra. So we know that in that sense that they're very connected and that their source of power is the same.
Well, I think like one thing I go to that's really interesting is the magic show, right? That's an interesting moment early in the episodes. First of all, it really justifies us being the experts discussing this as we learn about his gear-based technology that gets gummed up literally with gum. Right?
I love that. Yeah, that was great.
Who else could do this panel but us?
That's exactly right, Dennin.
But you see that connection between her and Vision. He starts going a little crazy, and she's really the one who has to kind of get him under control and work through him with her powers. And even in the very first, sort of episode where the boss starts choking, she's like, Vision, fix him. And it's that command. It's almost like she doesn't control him like the other people in the world, but there is that deep connection because she kind of created him. So his power, like he reaches in and phases through and pulls the thing out. It was triggered by her giving him permission to utilize that power. So it's fascinating to explore that connection between the creator and the created in this case.
Yeah, exactly. And also he is imbued really with her image of Vision, not with the true memories or thoughts of Vision. So he doesn't have the capability to really act on his own like the original Vision did, who had the full Mind Stone in him. The TV Vision can only act in a way that matches what Wanda wants for her show.
Right. Oh, and I think that's important because you mentioned for the show. And I think we've got to talk about this Westview anomaly. I'm sorry, Westview. I went to school in Westview. It's my middle school, Westview. I can't believe I forgot that. Westview anomaly that we're talking about here. Because this is really important because this is the stage. This is the reality. This is the pocket dimension, the thing created from Wanda. And I want to talk about what you guys think this really is. We've got like a Big Bang type of event. It's the Genesis, if we're going with the biblical sense. Is it a pocket dimension? Dennin, I know you've got thoughts on this, and hopefully you can explain why it does have this hexagonal shape.
Well, I have a very, very strong view that this is a mini Big Bang, and that's because they refer to the cosmic microwave background signature when they're first exploring, what the pattern is in this before they discover the TV signature. And I think it's an absolutely fascinating idea. I give lots of talks on the Big Bang and the creation and how we try and bring quantum mechanics together with relativity to understand it as fluctuations of the vacuum state in which a space-time bubble spontaneously appears and grows. And we always think of like neighboring universes, right? You get multiple bubbles and you have ones next to each other. It occurred to me, in principle, I can't think of a reason why you couldn't somehow get a bubble within an existing bubble, right? And what that would mean, and to have two different space times overlaying each other. So I really feel that they're pushing the boundaries, and this is going to be many, many years down the road, one of those classic moments where we look back in time and say science fiction predicted something interesting. I hope one of my colleagues listens to this podcast and goes and figures out what is the relativistic calculation needed to understand one space-time being overlaid with another space-time, which is going to be very different than, say, a pocket dimension. And when they do the calculation, I really hope they get a hexagon, because Dan, I have no idea why it has to be a hexagon versus anything else, but it gives you a really cool pun because we get to call it the hex.
Hexes are it's the shape with the most sides that can tile. So, I mean, they're interesting in that sense.
Well, I mean,
that may have been what she did, Dan. Maybe the only way to create a new universe like that is to tile it with small patches of space-time. And if you're going to tile it, you're tiling it with hexagons and you get a hexagon. And we all know, Dan, let's be honest, this is the perfect moment to point out that the base state of a perfect foam of bubbles of the same size is based on the hexagon. So, and we know foam is the ideal state of matter. So clearly that's why this is a hexagon.
Now, Dan, I want to go back one step there, and I'm curious. I always thought that you can't really form, like, it's not really possible for a Big Bang to occur inside of an already existing universe. Is that true?
You know what, Ben, I have a feeling that the answer to that is no one's thought of it before, because why would you expect a Big Bang inside of a Big Bang? I mean, I think when you think about the sort of energetics of what's going on, right? A black hole is a singularity in space-time. The Big Bang was a singularity. So we get various types of singularities within our existing space-time. Wanda has incredible power and energy. Wanda controls entropy, which gives us the arrow of time, or one of our arrows of time. So I really do wonder if this is a lot like just an interesting space-time singularity that's another Big Bang.
I've got one for you, Dennin, and this is kind of goes along with the pocket dimensions. I'm curious what you think about this. I was reading this article about warped extra dimensions. This is the Randall-Sundrum model of physics, and this is an idea that in order to explain dark matter, you've got fermions that travel through a fifth dimension that can kind of create a pocket dimension, and that in some way explains dark matter. I think I've got the broad strokes on that, but you might have to dial in on the specifics.
Dan, this is one time I think you nailed it. Like, I don't know that I could actually say it any better than that. That's awesome. And way to go. Look, you inspired me with chemistry and the brain, and now you're explaining fifth dimensions. One of the things that's really exciting about the current state of theoretical physics is we're like 99.9% sure there's got to be more than the 4 dimensions we experience, but we have no idea how they're structured. And so you can get exciting different ways the extra dimensions can exist. They can be curled up and really tiny. They can be large. This is what this particular model talks about, a fifth dimension that actually is what they call extra large. And that structure and the way particles move, if you think about it, we move in 3 dimensions, right? But you could imagine moving in a fifth. It's kind of like if you were stuck on a sheet of paper, could only move back and forth and right and left, and suddenly discovered there was an up and down. That's moving in the 3rd dimension. It's like us discovering that, there's just one more way we can move. And so I think the fact that we don't even fully understand the full structure of space-time itself goes back to Ben's question. Could you have another Big Bang within our structure? Well, we have to understand that structure fully first. So I think, Dan, these extra dimensions and what you pointed out to probably play a key role in understanding if you could have a Big Bang occur within our existing universe.
I think what's important about that, Dennin, is that we have this anomaly, we have this new reality, and as you mentioned, you like the Big Bang, this background radiation, and one of the things that I think is fun about this show, and it creates this great moment where we find this equipment that can actually detect and watch the television show that Wanda is broadcasting. This is kind of odd that she would be broadcasting this, but I love that this 480 by 360 interlaced signal is being interwoven with this background radiation, and that it allows Kat Dennings' character, who, just as a side note here, every time I look you up on social media, Dennin, I always get Kat Dennings to comes up, so I should tag her and everything as well. But her character is great because she finds this out and is then able to watch what's going on inside of the anomaly. I love this. What did you think about that interwoven nature of that?
So I have a question for Ben here about this. I love the interwoven nature, Dan. I definitely think that's important to discuss, but here's my fundamental engineering question, right? I think she was incredibly clever to just go find an existing monitor that already had the technology to read that signature. I don't know why they had one in the portable mobile military unit that they did. But obviously, when she figured out the signature was there, she could also have built from scratch a monitor that read the signature. So, Ben, from your perspective, was this more efficient to try and find one? And what were the odds of having that technology lying around versus building her own from scratch to read it? Because that confused me a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that, some of this military equipment they have lying around is old enough that you can still find an old tube TV with a VHF or UHF tuner. What's interesting is that our TV signals change over time as well. So one, I'm curious is if the signal started out in the Dick Van Dyke era as the old style TV carrier signals that existed back then, and as the time went on, did they have to keep upgrading to newer color TVs and then even newer digital TVs once they got into the most modern era, which was, I think by the time you get to like the Modern Family era, you only had digital signals. There's no analog signals at that point. So you would have had to upgrade your TV. Actually, the black and white color thing is actually explainable because the color TV was always, they were able to hide the color information in the old black and white signal. Which is really cool because a old black and white TV could watch the color signal and still watch it as black and white. This was like one of the most impressive feats of engineering in broadcast history, was making that happen. way back in the day.
Well, and I do want to point out there, just, I want to flex my television muscle here, but I believe it was 2006 where you had to broadcast in what was, quasi HD television, and that's when the digital signal changed. So, in fact, you are right. Everything up to the final WandaVision, where it's the Modern Family / Office, you'd have to change your television. They would have to run out and grab a new one to catch that episode.
So clearly there were some real television nerds, Dan, in this military base to keep all their stuff around and never throw them out. I'm wondering if there was a master of television in this task force, just in case they were needed for exactly this purpose.
I think the government should always have someone on the payroll, but that's me.
I take more of a Occam's razor approach to that, in that you're probably not actually allowed to throw anything away, so they probably just had the monitor lying around somewhere.
That could be right. Because you do definitely have to recycle your TV stuff. But to go to your original question, Dan, I do wonder a little bit, we have this great theory of the holographic theory of the universe that says that all the information is actually at the surface of the universe. And holograms are basically two-dimensional images that capture all the information you need to recreate the three-dimensional image. And we've obviously done many, many episodes on holographic type technology. So anyone interested in this should just look up our podcast and find those episodes. But I think Wanda kind of naturally did that with her universe that she created, right? As she projected the full internal 3D onto the surface. And the most natural way to do that would be as a TV signal, because TV is the common 2D sort of representation of our 3D world, particularly since, as we find out later, how important TV was to her psyche. So not surprised at all that this ended up with a television signal on the surface of her universe.
Well, and I think that's really important to remember when you are trying to analyze the anomaly.
Yeah, exactly. Her life was her most traumatic moments took place around television. So it makes sense that in a universe she creates with her own rules, that the background radiation is going to be a television signal rather than just a plain old boring microwave background radiation that our universe has.
I think that's right. And I think you may bring up a good point there, Ben, because one of the final two things I want to talk about for this particular anomaly that I found fascinating are, number one, the ability of its borders to rewrite reality. That's one. And then the creation of reality, of life out of seemingly nothing. Let's talk about the rewriting reality, because, they mentioned that this particular border, the actual border of the anomaly itself, can rewrite cells at the molecular level. It's kind of like Where's Waldo on When I'm Going to Drop a reference to one of our previous episodes. Then you beat me to it, but I'm going to tag on to that. We did a whole episode on matter transporters, Star Trek world, and this immediately made me think of that, breaking something down to its fundamental particles and then rewriting it, which is kind of what they do. Ben, you work at the junction point between brains, biology, and science. Did this make sense to you?
To some degree, yeah. We see with her creation chaos magic that she's to some degree, it seems like she's able to create matter out of whole cloth. She probably can't quite do that. She's probably using the whole E = MC squared backwards kind of thing, where she's using energy from the magic, from other dimensions or whatever, and using that to, reverse manifest matter. But using that same kind of power with her entropy power, there's nothing to say that she couldn't break down the molecules and atoms of the objects that are crossing that barrier and change them into other colors, other materials. If you can make matter, it's trivial to change matter.
And I think another aspect of this, Ben, goes to the idea that we have two universes overlaying each other, right? She did not eliminate our universe. She created a space-time anomaly that overlaid and was in the same space as our universe. And that space-time is going to have its own, perhaps slightly different fundamental constants and slightly different properties. And so when you look at the quantum level, we are all sort of vibrations, excitations, oscillations of sort of the fundamental nature of things. So you can imagine, as you cross through the boundary, what I really like about the idea is if the parameters are very, very close, right? You're not going to die. You're not going to suddenly completely fall apart. You still are partly in our space time because it's overlaid on that. But there's this new one here, and we know slight changes in things create interesting interference patterns. So everything is changed a little bit by that interference pattern. And this is perhaps why the Army becomes a circus. I have nothing against the Army. I think the Army does some great things, but it's an interesting statement, perhaps, that the writers of the show were making, that the circus and the Army must be close in this parameter space. And that's what they became with the interference pattern. And you see that with everybody else, right? There's a close thing. The guy in the full hazmat suit becomes a beekeeper, something very close. And so Wanda, what's nice is it saves her some effort. She doesn't have to consciously detect everything that comes into her anomaly and change it. The fact that she's overlaid her own space-time naturally changes things to something close but different.
Well, I want to mention something here, which is seemingly not going to be connected, but it is. I love this because at one point we see a truck try to drive into the anomaly, and in fact, half of it becomes rewritten. And that's a really interesting moment. And I was just reading this article about a cardinal. The location of this cardinal was kept quiet. No one wanted to know because this is a very unique thing. This particular cardinal has bilateral gynodromorphism. I think I'm saying that correctly. Basically, right down the center of its body is male and female. It's just like, Two-Face in some ways. Half of it's male, half of it is female. It's got ovaries and testes. And as you mentioned, male and female are very, very similar, especially when we're in the fetus. It's just a quick chemical change that determines what sex we are assigned at birth. And I think that is a really interesting kind of addition to what you're saying there, Dennin.
No, I think you're exactly right, Dan. It is basically related. We also get to learn from this, though, of course, a fundamental feature. Our space-time exists in both places, but Wanda's space-time only exists within the anomaly. And this would explain some of the stuff we'll talk about probably a little bit more depth, that things inside that were created there can't leave because there's no equivalent space-time out where we are. But we can go in and out, though it does change us.
We absolutely see that. We see Monica Rambeau go into the anomaly in her bulletproof vest and normal stuff, and she turns into the disco outfit. This great 80s bell-bottom outfit or 70s outfit, and then when she gets spit out, that stays. So the matter of her clothing and all of that did get transformed, but because it was matter from our universe, it stuck around. And that's the same reason the truck, when it gets half turned, it sticks around. But that's also why Vision or the children can't leave the anomaly, because they don't have an analog in the normal universe.
Well, I want to just correct you. I think that is the greatest outfit in the show. I loved her outfit in that 70s episode. Those pants are amazing. If they made them in my size, I would probably wear them. I love 70s outfits for sure. One of the things I'm going to close up here with possibly, you're getting a big look in here at WonderCon 2021. You're getting a huge look into what is my favorite scientific experiment, and it leads us into the final thing, which is abiogenesis. This idea that life is springing from non-life, and at least on three occasions, Wanda does this when she creates. Well, actually, on 4 occasions when she creates Vision. There's that immaculate conception. I mean, I don't think that Vision, as being a robot, is able to impregnate her. And the kids are kind of come out of nothing. And also she turns a mobile of butterflies into real butterflies. So she's able to do this. And I want to tell you about my favorite science experiment, and it's a scientist named Sidney Fox. I'm going to quickly run down this for you. The idea behind this was he wanted to see if he could create life on the conditions of primordial Earth. What does that mean? He started out using incredible heat and electrical charges that would simulate lightning, and he used hydrogen, ammonia, and methane. He combined them in a flask. At the end of his experiment, he had pseudo amino acids. He then used another quick experiment using only heat, and he was able to take those quasi amino acids and then string together a long string of proteins. The final experiment, he called those proteinoids. he was able to take those proteinoids using salt water, just like our oceans, and heat. And in 20 minutes, those protein clusters grouped together into what he called protocells. Now, these cells were not like cells we see now. They were spherical in shape, very similar to coccus bacteria, if I'm saying that correctly, the circle-shaped bacteria. They were similar to that. They even had a double membrane, but they did not have organelles. It would be difficult to say whether they were alive or not, but they could reproduce asexually through budding. They were able to split into other versions of themselves. I really thought this was interesting because in a lot of ways, Dr. Fox at least showed that there was a path to inorganic non-life to having life. I love that experiment, and I think in a lot of ways, through her entropy control, she's able to do this. Do you see this connection, Dennin, or am I absolutely grasping at straws here?
Dan, I think you nailed it again. You're on a roll this episode. I love it.
I know. Thanks, Dan. You're really giving me credit here, man. I really appreciate it.
No, this is perfect because when you think about it, the core physics of that, there's a lot of chemistry, a lot of biology, a lot of other stuff in it. But the core physics is what we call self-organization, which is, sort of chemical reactions leading to more complex organized structures, which at its surface seems to be against the core principle of the second law of thermodynamics, where we maximize disorder. And we know Wanda is an entropy magic person. However, when you combine energy and entropy principles to work together, when you put energy into a system, it's what we call non-equilibrium. And then you can often get this self-organization. You can also get it in certain equilibrium systems under the right conditions. So again, when you think about Wanda as someone who has both energy and entropy control, those are exactly the physics you need, the science you need to have a magic that can create life from non-living matter and do it quickly. So I really see this as the final piece of evidence that Wanda is the Scarlet Witch, as we learn, and is the one who controls entropy or chaos magic.
Well, Dennin, I'm going to throw it back to you because one of the things that we're looking at here, and one of the things that I immediately thought of with these protocells, is this idea of emergent properties. And of course, thanks to you, you know the first thing I thought of, and that's foam. All these proteinoids, as they combined, I keep thinking of graboids from Tremors, another episode that we did. But these proteinoids, when they combine, they have properties that, as a whole, that they did not have individually. And of course, I thought of foam. Bubbles have their own property, but many bubbles have even more properties than that, advanced properties that the individual does not have. And in some ways, Vision is kind of close to this. He, as a being that he is, he has properties that are similar to robots, similar to life. Is he alive? He seems to have this emergent property of life, of consciousness, which I think is really interesting. And biology, we got science, we got engineering when it comes to Vision and all this. So Ben, I'm going to give you the final word on all of this.
It's really tough to define alive versus not alive. We think of things like viruses, which self-replicate, which grow, which infect ourselves and all sorts of animals and plants on our planet. But are they really alive? It's just a strand of DNA that's injecting and creating directions. Is Vision alive? Especially the TV version of him, where he's just an automaton that was created by Wanda. Is he? I mean, I would kind of argue to some degree that he's just a puppet. Everyone else in the anomaly is being puppeted by her. So is she controlling him too? Maybe, although she does give her children the choice to age up or not. So it's clear to some degree that they're autonomous from her. So I guess to some degree that's got to be some form of life.
No, I think you're right, and I think even if you're not right, we are not puppets. We can think for ourselves, and we would love to hear from you. This is the end of the science of WandaVision. I think we've kind of wrapped things up, but if we have missed anything, you can find our show. We are on Twitter at FGGGbT Pod. We're on Facebook at FGGGbT, but we are individual members of the Brain Trust. We answer social media all the time. Dennin, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on Twitter and Instagram. You just flip my name at Dennin Michael. But then you can find me on Facebook. You got to stick a prof in there at Prof Dennin Michael.
Ben, where can people find you?
You can find me on all the major social media networks at B Siepser.
And how do you spell that?
You spell that BSIEPSER.
And I can be found on Twitter at Daniel J. Glenn, on Instagram at The Daniel J. Glenn, and on Facebook at Analytical Mastermind. So thank you so much for watching The Science of WandaVision. And as we say at the end of every episode, you want to be a superhero and not a supervillain. So please be a superhero. Like, subscribe, and share this video on social media, and watch our podcast. And you can listen to it as well. It is a podcast. Fascinating Gadgets, Gizmos, Gear-Based Technologies. FGGGbT.com is the website. So thank you for watching this panel, and please enjoy the rest of your convention.